For decades, if you wanted a tough, boxy SUV that turned heads, you handed Mercedes or Land Rover somewhere between $60,000 and $200,000. No exceptions. That was the game, and those brands owned it. Then a Chinese company most people had never heard of showed up in the UK, sold over 28,000 cars in its first year, became the fastest-growing mainstream automotive brand the country had seen in a decade, and built the whole thing out of aluminum. If Mercedes thought the luxury SUV game was theirs forever, the Jaecoo J6 just proved them wrong. And the chassis underneath it is the reason nobody in Stuttgart has an answer yet. Why the box always wins. Before we get to the engineering, there is something car companies figured out a long time ago that has nothing to do with specs and everything to do with your brain. Think about the vehicles that hold their value best. The G-Wagon, the Defender, the Bronco. What do they have in common? They are all boxes, flat roofs, vertical glass, sharp edges everywhere. None of them are aerodynamic, none of them are efficient, and people line up to buy them anyway. Here is why. When your brain sees a boxy vehicle, it does not think about fuel economy. It registers strength. Straight lines and sharp angles trigger something deep and instinctive that says, "This thing is solid. This thing will protect me." Mercedes has known this for 40 years. The G-Wagon has barely changed its shape in that time, on purpose, because the moment you round off those corners, the spell breaks. Keep the right angles, and you have an icon people saved for years to own. If the premium brands had been the only ones who could build a box that looked and felt this way, the game would have stayed closed forever. But a box is a shape, not a patent. And someone in China decided to find out what happens when you build one better for less. The aluminum problem nobody else solved here is where the J6 gets genuinely interesting, because the solution it found is one most people would not expect from a mainstream SUV. Most cars, including expensive ones, are built from steel. Steel is cheap, it is strong, and the auto industry has used it for over a century. The problem with steel is weight and rust. Drive through enough mud, rain, and road salt, and steel corrodes from the inside out. Every manufacturer manages this with coatings and treatments, but the vulnerability is always there, waiting. Aluminum is different. It weighs roughly a third as much as steel for the same volume. It does not rust, and when you engineer it correctly, it can match or exceed steel's strength. The catch has always been cost. Shaping aluminum into car body panels historically required precision machining and hand assembly. Slow, expensive work that kept aluminum bodies locked inside supercars and ultra-premium vehicles. If you have ever wondered why a Range Rover costs what it costs, part of the answer is that aluminum is genuinely expensive to work with. The J6 cracked this using a process called giga-casting. You take a machine that generates thousands of tons of pressure and inject molten aluminum into a mold in a single shot. Instead of welding together dozens of smaller steel parts to form a subframe, you produce one continuous piece of aluminum that replaces all of them at once. That does two things simultaneously. It eliminates hundreds of welding joints, which are historically the weak points where cracks start and corrosion creeps in, and it drops the weight of the vehicle dramatically. The J6 tips the scales at around 1,800 kilograms, despite carrying a 70 kilowatt-hour battery pack that weighs several hundred kilograms on its own. Without the aluminum structure saving weight everywhere else, this car would be considerably heavier and considerably less capable. But the weight saving is only half the story. The other half is what happens when you take this thing off-road and drag it through a river. Because aluminum does not rust. Jaecoo designed the J6 with a 30-year structural lifespan in mind, and that is not marketing language. It is a material science decision built into the bones of the car. Drive a steel-bodied SUV through mud and salt for a decade, and the frame tells you about it. Drive this one through the same conditions, and the aluminum shrugs it off. For a vehicle designed to go places that punish metal, that difference compounds over every year of ownership. Electric in the mud. Now here's the part that makes traditional off-road people nervous. The J6 is fully electric. No diesel engine, no transfer case, no mechanical locking differentials. Just two electric motors, a battery pack, and software. If you grew up believing that off-road capability came from a big growling diesel with a mechanical drivetrain, this feels wrong. And the instinct is immediate. Water and electricity do not mix. What happens when you send this thing through a deep river crossing and the battery gets submerged? Jaecoo addressed this directly. The entire high-voltage system, both motors and the battery pack, is rated IP68. That means completely sealed against dust and able to survive sustained submersion in water, not a puddle splash. Actual submersion. They engineered every seal, every connector, and every housing around the assumption that this vehicle would be driven into rivers and through deep mud regularly. But sealing the hardware is only the beginning, because the real advantage of going electric off-road is not durability, it is torque. When you press the accelerator on a diesel, there is a delay. The engine builds revs while the turbo spools and the gears shift. By the time maximum torque reaches the wheels, a fraction of a second has passed. In most driving, that delay is invisible. But when you are crawling up a steep, muddy slope and one wheel starts to spin, that fraction of a second is the difference between holding traction and getting stuck. The J6 delivers its full 385 Newton-meters of torque the instant you touch the pedal. No delay, no spool, and the software controlling the front and rear motors can redirect power between wheels in milliseconds. If one wheel loses grip, the system detects it almost before it happens and shifts power to the wheels that still have traction. No mechanical differential needs to lock. No clutch pack needs to engage. It happens silently and continuously. The result for the driver is something that does not feel like a computer helping you. It feels like the car simply has more grip than anything you have driven before. The floor disappears of all the technology in the J6. The feature that draws the most attention sounds like it should not be real. Jaecoo calls it 540-degree transparent chassis mode. Here is the problem it solves. When you are off-road approaching a rock, a rut, or a water crossing you are not sure about, you cannot see what is directly beneath your front bumper. The hood is in the way. You either stop, get out, and walk around to check, or you guess and hope. The J6 has cameras mounted under the mirrors, at the front grille, and at the rear. Individually, they show the areas around the car, but the onboard computer takes all of those feeds at once, factors in your speed, steering angle, and suspension travel, and stitches them together into a live three-dimensional image on the 15.6-inch center screen. And on that screen, the body of the car becomes invisible. You can see the ground directly underneath the vehicle, including the exact position of your front tires relative to whatever obstacle is ahead. You are sitting inside a sealed cabin, and you are looking through the floor of the car in real time. For anyone who has ever scraped a wheel on a rock they could not see, this feature alone changes the conversation. For a new off-road driver who would spend the whole trail anxious about what is under them, it is genuinely transformative. The box with no spare tire. Walk around the back of the J6 and you will notice something mounted on the side-hinged rear door. It looks exactly like a spare tire cover. Every visual cue says there is a spare wheel inside it. There is not. Open it up and you find an external storage compartment, a box, a boot mounted on the outside of the car. Think about what problem this solves. You go off-road, you come back with wet boots, muddy recovery gear, and a charging cable caked in dirt. Normally, you stuff all of that into the cabin and ruin the interior, or you leave it at home and reduce your capability. The external compartment puts that storage outside the vehicle entirely. The gear stays with the car. The interior stays clean. It is a small feature, but it tells you exactly how this vehicle was designed by people who think about what actually happens when you use an off-roader for off-roading. Why this changes the game. Step back from the specs and think about what the J6 actually represents. For decades, the formula for a premium off-road SUV has been the same. Take a large steel body, install a powerful diesel or petrol engine, add a mechanical four-wheel drive system with a low-range gearbox, charge a significant premium for the badge on the hood, market it to people who want to feel capable and powerful, even if most of them will never take the car further off-road than a gravel car park. That formula worked because building this kind of vehicle required enormous investment and expertise. Only a handful of manufacturers could do it well, and the gap between them and any challenger was almost impossible to close. The J6 does not close that gap. It goes around it entirely. Aluminum instead of steel, electric motors instead of combustion, software instead of mechanical systems. You do not need a century of diesel engine development if you are not using a diesel. You do not need decades of steel body expertise if you are building in aluminum with giga-casting. If the established players had been the only ones who could deliver the feeling of a tough, desirable premium SUV, the market would have stayed locked. But Jaecoo just proved that the feeling does not require the badge. It requires the engineering. And when the engineering arrives at a fraction of the price, the badge stops being a moat and starts being a markup. The legacy brands are not standing still. They are working on their own electric platforms, their own aluminum processes, their own software. The gap will close, but right now, in 2026, a Chinese company most people could not name 2 years ago just built the SUV that proves the luxury off-road market was never really about luxury at all. It was about capability. And capability just got a lot cheaper. That is the Jaecoo J6. An aluminum shell, a software brain, 2 electric motors, and a spare tire box with no tire in it. If this changed what you thought was possible from a Chinese car brand, subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you buy this over a G-Wagon if the price was right?